America's half-cocked president says he was cocked and loaded for a strike on Iran last night, but he called it off at the last minute when he learned that 150 people would die. Since making that life-or-death decision about American national security and regional stability, Donald Trump has tweeted 6 times, including to offer his own TikTok of his decision-making to attack journalists and, of course, to complain about the Russia investigation. He's also conducted a sit-down interview with our own Chuck Todd, in which he offered color commentary on his decision-making.
So did you greenlight something, or had you said, if we do it, I'll do this? What was the order you gave?
Nothing is greenlighted until the very end because things change, right?
So you never gave a final order?
No. But we had something ready to go subject to my approval. And they came in, and they came in about a half an hour before. They said, "Sir, we're about ready to go." I said, "I want a better
planes
definition."
In the air? Were planes in the air?
We're about ready to go.
Yeah?
No, but they would have been pretty soon. And things would have happened to a point where you wouldn't turn back or couldn't turn back. So they came and they said, "Sir, we're ready to go. We'd like a decision." I said, "I want to know something before you go. How many people will be killed? In this case, Iranians." Mm-hmm. I said, "How many people are going to be killed?" "Sir, I'd like to get back to you on that." Great people, these generals. They said, came back, said, "Sir, approximately 150. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it. And here we are sitting with 150 dead people. That would have taken place probably within a half an hour after I said go ahead.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
The New York Times report that first revealed the decision to strike and then the president's reversal of that decision tells a slightly different story. Quote, "The operation was underway in its early stages when it was called off," a senior administration official said. Planes were in the air and ships were in position, but no missiles had been fired when word came to stand down. The Times' Peter Baker adds this about the day of swerving decision-making. Quote, "In a volatile day of internal debates and an on-again, off-again strike against Iran, Mr. Trump confronted the essential conflict of his approach to national security. For 2.5 years, he has veered between bellicose threats against America's enemies and promises to get the United States out of the intractable wars of the Middle East. Now, he had to choose, and as if to remove any doubt that to him, it's all a show, the Times' Maggie Haberman tweeted this, quote, "A source told me 30 minutes ago that Trump was pleased with his own performance last night, loved being in command by ordering the strikes and then ordering the stand down, and the president just tweeted it." Here to talk about it all, some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, former Republican congressman from Florida, now an independent, David Jolly, and executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion, Tim O'Brien. Plus, journalist who covers foreign affairs, Elise Labott, is joining us. Foreign policy analyst Tom Nichols, professor at the Naval War College. And with us from the New York Times, White House correspondent Michael Crowley. Michael Crowley, we haven't seen you since you joined the New York Times. Congrats on your new posting.
Thanks.
And take us through what you and your colleagues were reporting all through the night and this morning.
Well, we're still trying to get to the bottom of exactly why the president called off these airstrikes that he authorized. And, you know, there have been different versions of this put out by the president on Twitter and Trump allies in public. And I don't think we have a kind of clear and convincing answer at this point. So that is the great hunt that is underway. You know, even the president's own account, when he describes this casualty figure, is a little hard to make sense of. I mean, you know, by his telling, it appears that he's basically authorized the operation and then asked what the casualty count is going to be, and then says that he's told, we'll have to get back to you on that. It sort of doesn't add up. I mean, that's typically done very early in the process, that you would have that number. It's hard to understand why someone would have to get back to him. That account is just a little bit peculiar. But what we do know is that he walked right up to the brink of what would have been a very dramatic and I think indisputably dangerous military action that could have escalated quickly out of control. There's a difference of opinion about whether it would and could have been containable or not, but certainly it would have been a dangerous strike. And what we also don't know is what could come next. Is the possibility of some sort of military action still on the table, or has the president decided that's just not the path he's going to go down? I don't think we know that either.
Elise, I think that the idea that this information is all out in public and being amplified by Donald Trump is something extraordinary that we shouldn't skip past. National security, when it is conducted behind closed doors, is done so to protect innocent lives, not just in the context of a decision, but in the future. And I think that a lot of folks have a feeling that moving forward, lives, including those of the men and women of America's military, may be further imperiled by Donald Trump showing such an aversion to a single tactic or a single kind of military operation. I mean, just can you widen the lens for us a little bit on just how limiting it is to reveal that a military option presented to him by his advisors was something he dismissed at the last moment because of the cost in human life?
Well, I mean, you're right, Nicole, but that's the narrative he wants to put out, right? That's not necessarily the narrative that happened. I mean, my understanding is the president, all his advisors were on the same page. And then the president came back later and, decided against it. Now, did he have cold feet? Did he talk to someone? He talks to a lot of friends and business associates on his own. They get in his ears, sometimes to the good, sometimes to the detriment. As Michael said, I mean, he was, fairly diplomatic, but it's inconceivable that when the president's military advisors are advising him on a potential action, that he didn't know what the casualty count was. This was a weekend. It was the middle of the night in Iran, so casualties wouldn't have been automatically damaged. But this is the idea that the president wants to put out there. It's also entirely possible that they got a signal back from the Iranians that they got the message, because my understanding is that there was a message passed through the Omanis to the Iranians: beware, a strike is coming, something's coming. And so possibly the president got word back that, the Iranians got the message. Whatever it is, it does put the president in kind of a dispute with his advisors, and it makes it a little bit difficult to decide on a strategy when you know that the president could turn it around like that.
Tom, I want to ask you about carrying out American foreign policy as a president with next to no credibility, not just among more than half of the U.S. population, but as someone who has had skirmishes on Twitter and at world summits with our allies, as someone who has embraced publicly and privately some of the world's most brutal dictators. There is something, and I described it as a white-knuckle moment for the country earlier in the week. There's something, the decision aside, and let's examine that separately. But just the description or the articulation of what Donald Trump is doing, as Elise points out, it's not even clear that that's a fact.
One of the problems here is that if you're really going to go up against the Iranians or any other serious power like this, you need to have all your ducks in a row. You need to have your allies on board. You need to have the entire bureaucracy and the national security establishment rowing in the same direction. You need to have made some phone calls to your allies and put out some subtle signals to your opponents that everybody needs to get out of your way. That's how superpowers do things. Again, I should point out I don't represent the Navy or the government on this. My view is if you're going to take down the Iranians for the kind of behavior they're engaging in, and I don't think it should go unanswered, but I don't think President Trump's the person to lead us into this kind of conflict. You really need to do a lot of prep work, and the problem is this administration doesn't have a lot of credibility either, I think, with a fair number of people at home, and certainly with a lot of our allies, because no one ever knows what they're doing at any given moment or why they're doing it. And you can't think about the use of force without that kind of careful preparation. It just doesn't work, and this is the result you get, is a kind of a hot mess where everybody's standing around looking at each other trying to figure out what just happened.
I want to stay with the hot mess theme, Michael Crowley, and read some more of your reporting, because it is extraordinary that we know this much this quickly. You all report Mr. Trump's national security advisor split about whether to respond militarily. Senior administration officials said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, the national security advisor, and Gina Haspel, the CIA director, had favored a military response. But top Pentagon officials cautioned that such an action could result in a spiraling escalation with risks for American forces in the region. Obviously, I'm a veteran of the Bush administration. There were often stories in your newspaper about Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz partying with people like Condi Rice and Colin Powell, but never the next morning. This is an extraordinary body of reporting about the very public divides among the president's national security advisors.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to make sure that the several colleagues who worked on the story get the credit here that they deserve. A lot of really good people pitched in on this, and it was an amazing window into the deliberations of this administration. But I would say that, there's still a sense, and I think Elise put her finger on it, that there's more to this that we don't know. So although a remarkable amount did come tumbling out, I think Elise is right that, we know that the president makes big decisions outside of the normal lanes of policymaking that we're all accustomed to and that you saw in the Bush administration, where, you had a regular policy process, and it was considered this kind of shocking break from the policy process if one official went in directly to the Oval Office and wasn't making their views known at the table. Whereas with this president, the question is who is he on the phone with when he walks out of the Situation Room? It could be a TV host. It could be somebody he did business with in Manhattan. I don't know something specific in this case, but I do think that there are people around the president who feel like he makes these decisions not based entirely on the opinions of his national security officials who are presenting him with the battle plans, and that he could turn virtually anywhere for advice. It makes him incredibly unpredictable, and I think it has our allies extremely nervous about trying to figure out what the U.S. is going to do next and whether we could be on the brink of war.
Elise, you talked about back channels. There was an open channel of communication via social media from Vladimir Putin. We know Donald Trump likes to line himself right up with Vladimir Putin's foreign policy goals. Do you think it's a coincidence that once again the American president did what Putin wanted to have done?
I got to be honest. I don't really think that Putin was at play here. I think the president got cold feet for whatever reason. As some, Fox host, or was he, talking to some back channels with Oman, or, there's a lot that we don't know. I don't think necessarily, why didn't Putin call up and, just kind of talk to him and they put that call out? I don't think that's really the case here. I think something we also have to take a look at is, as Michael was talking about, this would have had, could have had a very dangerous escalation with unpredictable consequences. So I think a lot of people think it was a good end result. Maybe those like John Bolton or Mike Pompeo would have liked to see a strike. Probably best that the U.S. and Iran are not trading military strikes. But the indecision, as we've been talking about, is really what's concerning here, because what kind of message does that send to Iran, who's really engaged in a game of chicken with President Trump, looking to see if he's going to keep swerving, continuing to test him? What kind of message does it send to Kim Jong-un? Maybe I'll lob, I lobbed a couple of short-range missiles, maybe I'll lob a medium-range one and see what he does. I think this indecision and this lack of a strategy, these are larger questions when you're looking at U.S. foreign policy that have to be answered.
Tom, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's a tie between the things he says, if it's Little Rocket Man in North Korea, and the things he ends up doing, if it's, becoming a pen pal, love letter writing bestie with Kim Jong-un. I mean, do you think that our policy vis-a-vis Iran is heading in the same direction as our policy vis-a-vis North Korea, where despite the briefings that must be available to him from the U.S. intelligence community about the threat that they represent in the region, how destabilizing they are there, the blood that the Iranians have on their hands in Iraq, including to U.S. soldiers, that at his heart, Donald Trump is, I don't want to use the word for peace, but that he really is the isolationist, the anti-interventionalist that he's pitched himself as since the South Carolina primary, very early in the Republican primary season.
I cannot imagine what it must be like to have to brief Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And, you know, you and I have both worked for politicians. I worked for a senior Republican senator. They listen. They ask questions about things like casualties. That's the first thing they ask.
Yeah.
So I think part of the problem here is that Donald Trump comes from the world of TV, where nothing is real. Nothing has actual consequences. And it suddenly occurs to him that this isn't a TV show and that people are going to shoot back. I think that changes his calculation at the last minute. I don't know if this story about Oman is true. My guess is if there was communication through Iran, from Iran through Oman back to the White House, my guess is the Iranians said, go ahead and take your shot, roll the dice. I don't know that he did what Putin wanted him to do, but it didn't help that Putin, in the middle of the day, said this would be a bad thing to do. And I think every now and then the president suddenly comes to the realization, wow, this isn't TV. Real things will happen. And I'm one of the people who's glad that he backed off of this. I think it would have been a disastrously bad idea, but I think he did it in the most destructive way possible, and we're going to be paying the price for this kind of backing and forthing for a while to come. Things are going to get worse before they're going to get worse before they get worse.
Yeah.
But I think that this is not the end of this.
Look, David Jolly, I don't have an opinion about the decision. I think whenever a loss of life is avoided in the near term, that's a blessing. But I'm not convinced that this was the decision that will result in the least number of lives lost in the long run. And I'm not confident that Donald Trump is the best man to be representing our country's interests when it comes to Iran. He took MBS's word on it about this brutal slaughter of Khashoggi, and we know MBS is one of the people in his ear when it comes to Iran. He's done things at the behest of the Israeli leader. We know Israel has equities in Iran. I'm not sure that we have a steady hand receiving information and making these decisions. Are you?
Or a truthful hand.
Correct.
I'm not sure Donald Trump's telling the truth about what actually happened.
Correct.
As a TV and mass media guy, Donald Trump is trying to frame this as one of the defining leadership moments of his presidency, when in reality, the president's projection of incompetence and incoherence on the world stage is devastating to our national security interests.
Right.
This is not the first time that a strike package or a mission package has been changed or aborted. But to your earlier point, it really is the first time in modern political history there has been such transparency about this decision making. If Donald Trump really did not understand the consequences of the mission that he had previously approved, that speaks to his own level of incompetence. If he did and then aborted it at the last minute because something spoke to him, that speaks to his incoherence. You know, my concern, I know the stories that he will saber rattle and maybe start a war to try to win an election. My greater concern is what other nation states around the globe are thinking, knowing we've got 18 more months of Donald Trump at the helm of the White House as commander-in-chief. What can we extract in our national security interests as adverse nation states from the United States and its current leader?
Tim, you're a student of Donald Trump. You're a student of his lack of any sort of monogamous relationship with the truth. I mean, just examine him as a commander-in-chief in these moments.
Well, you know, getting back to what Tom said earlier, you know, he can't imagine what it would be like to brief Donald Trump. The reality is that Donald Trump is unbriefable. He's undisciplined intellectually and emotionally. He's not sophisticated. He is a student of nothing other than his own public image. He's driven generally by self-absorbed goals. And you put all that together, and it adds up to what we've always known about him when it comes to presidential character. This is a man who is very dangerous when it comes to issues like military strikes or the rule of law. The second the U.S. withdrew from the nuclear agreement with Iran in the spring, there was only two routes. You were either going to crack down on Iran economically or you were going to go to war. Trump had a lot of time to think about the net outcomes of that decision. He overturned an Obama agreement. He was proud about that. He broadcast that. But there were consequences of that decision, and those have come home to roost. And he wasn't ready for it. And what he cares about most even now is performance art. Convincing people that he was in control, convincing people that he made the right decision. I think in that moment in the interview with Chuck Todd, when he's talking about getting advice from his generals, and his lip curls a little bit, and he speaks disparagingly of his own military advisors.
It's unbelievable.
In that moment, he does a disservice to the men and women of this country who are in public service and in military service. And it should really raise questions in the minds of voters and Trump supporters about who this man is.
The last thing, too, is just the language. You know, cocked and loaded. I mean, what is he talking about?
Because this is a TV show to him. I mean, this is a
I
president.
missed that one. What's cocked and loaded? It's ludicrous.
Hey, well, somebody said it's the Secret Service code names for Eric and Don Jr. but look, this is the president that sees his entire presidency as a branding exercise. You know, the reporting that it's not the poll numbers that matter to him, it's the ratings. Yeah. This is a ratings week for him. And I am concerned going into Wednesday and Thursday of next week, where the Democrats have their debates. Yep. What is this president going to do on matters of national security, on immigration? I'm afraid that this strike package gets moved a week in the middle of the debate. I know that's crazy, and maybe it is, but we are seeing this president try to flood the zone on the media cycle for next week. It's already in place.
Do you think he's constitutionally weak enough that if this military decision gets bad reviews on the Sunday show, he'd revisit it?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think at all that this is the end of it. He's been embarrassed today. He's got to recognize that. However, he's trying to recreate the fact pattern here. He either launched a strike not knowing what the casualties were going to be, or in the middle of it, when he found out, decided to reverse. Either way, that's not good for him. He mismanaged a military strike that was going to be extremely consequential. Secondly, he still can't pull himself out of the performance art moment that he likes to occupy all the time. And the thing that dragged him down here, and it's going to become part of the immigration debate too, is he wants to project unilateral power, and that he's able to walk through all these moments without taking advice, without any consider the views of others, that he can get it done on his own. And then he discovers when the moment arrives that he can't. And he's not constituted to handle that in a mature way.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.